All right. Anything else you need to say or do before I get into it?
No, take it away.
All righty. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Carolyn Maguire, and I'm really excited to be here. It's so nice to be able to talk about this topic right now because we have such a challenge on our hands in terms of social crises. I am the author of a book that came out last year called Why Will No One Play With Me? And it is a parent training curriculum. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got here, and then I'm going to delve into things. What we decided to do is I will try to, respond to the chat, look at the chat, but we'll definitely hold questions to the end. And at the end, I'll leave plenty of time for questions, and you can put them in the chat, and I'll definitely answer them. And that way we can make sure we go through the material and don't get sidetracked too much, but I'm excited to have your questions, and don't worry, we'll leave plenty of time. So I want to just share who I am. I'm a mother. I have 2 children. And so I have been dealing with and living through their own social stuff and COVID and everything that's been going on. I am a certified ADHD executive function social skills coach. I was with the Hollowell Center. Dr. Ned Hollowell is a famous psychiatrist who wrote Driven to Distraction, other books about ADHD. And I was the coach for the Hollowell Center for many years. And a few years ago, I founded the Fundamentals of ADHD Coaching for Families program at the ADD Coach Academy, which is the only International Coach Federation training program that has that accreditation for ADHD in the world. And what it is a training program to teach people how to work with children, teenagers, young adults, and families. My method has always been from the beginning that I thought parent training was really an underserved thing. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here and why I'm doing things the way I'm doing them. And I completed the level 1A social thinking training, and I have a master's degree in education and early childhood development from Lesley University. I focused on executive function and social skills, and really spent a wonderful experience. They have a program where you design it yourself. It's very much modeled after a PhD, and I started that journey all so that I could write the book Why Will No One Play With Me, which I'll tell you about in a sec, and that came out last year. So how this all started was that when I was first working with teenagers and children and families with ADHD, I came to quickly see that social skills were such an underserved and under-discussed issue. I began with a licensed social worker, partnering and running social skills groups for various ages. Basically my first year doing this. But I noticed that parents were constantly asking questions, and I started looking for a guide that I could give parents to tell them what professionals knew so that they would have it and they would have that education. And when I'm not around, they can answer questions and they can figure out what they're doing. And at that time, I was doing a lot of academic coaching still, a lot of the things that our kids with learning disabilities and various challenges with organization need in terms of, how to do those life skills, how to get someplace, how to be on time, time management, that kind of thing. But social kept coming up. It kept coming up over and over and over again. And I started to notice that there was this gulch. There was this population that didn't necessarily qualify for services, but definitely had social emotional challenges, definitely needed to improve their communication, reading the room, all those completely important skills, and yet wouldn't really qualify to get help. Even outside of Boston, where I am, where there are myriad social skills groups. Many groups, prioritize kids who had the most acute diagnoses. And so there were these wait lists. And many of the teenagers I began working with would not go to see a group, would not join a group, would not even discuss the word social skills. And so this idea began ringing in my head 15 years ago, where I said, what if I could teach parents what professionals know, and I could provide them with a curriculum, and they could coach their child, or at the very least they would know more, right? So if their kid was in a social skills group, if their kid was receiving services in school, they would have information. If they couldn't afford someone, they could work with their child themselves, and they would do what we know is absolutely essential too, right? They would model, they would reinforce, and they would really give their child more support, because even if you're in a wonderful group, even if you're receiving wonderful things at school, you're not necessarily, the professionals are not there. And parents really had legit questions. Well, now fast forward to COVID, and here we are in this very difficult time where parents are being called upon to do everything, right? Last spring, I taught math, and they've changed math. I was, teaching my son, who's only 6, letter sounds. And it really, really kind of reinforces this message that the more we can provide either parent training where they come, or they attend sessions where we teach them things, or that parents can find that information, the better off we are, because parents really are part of the equation. So I want to start by saying that, I've added some stuff about COVID to this discussion of this curriculum and this concept, because I think it is essential that we know that for a while we're going to be in this situation. And so one of the things I really have felt from the beginning of this COVID crisis is that we can use other methods to teach social skills and to provide social emotional learning. That we can't just stop for 2 years, and that parents need to know how they can build those skills at home, because in many of the models we have for schools right now, kids are either doing 100% remote learning or partial remote learning, and that even special education children are really in need of these things. I also would say that I adapt for teenagers, because sometimes you can't directly say to them, we're working on your social skills, or they get upset and won't discuss it. And so one of the things I've done throughout this presentation is I've peppered in this sort of COVID lens, because I think that we need to provide this bridge for parents and for professionals. I've been working with many schools to help them as teachers try to meet the demands and help young people still continue to learn social skills. So here it is, learning in COVID. One of the things that I always feel is that an ideal situation is absolutely wonderful, but from the beginning, what I have found is ideal situations don't always happen. And so I always look at the core of the social emotional learning and how we learn these skills, and I back up from there, right? So I say to myself, we need models. We need to see someone, an image to navigate toward. How do we provide that even in this COVID situation? And how do we basically simulate this learning so that we continue to learn and grow? And so one of the things I've been working with a lot of families on and schools is to really remind families that engaging in dinner conversation, putting away your devices, can really build those skills that we need in terms of making conversation, making chit chat, making eye contact. And one of the things that's really interesting is that if you explain and discuss this with families, sometimes you have to coach them through, how to get everybody on board. But in many cases last spring, I had families where we just said the whole family is going to engage in this. So we're not isolating and singling out one child or teen. everybody can improve, right? Just like reading improves us all. The other thing is telling a tight story. So I don't know if any of you have children who you work with or who you know who do this, but many kids' stories meander, they go all over the place, there's no point. And that's part of how we want them to self-advocate too, right? Is that if they go to a professor or they go to a teacher and they have these meandering stories with no point, the teacher doesn't necessarily know what they're trying to say. So telling a tight story and being able to think about the details you're providing, why you're saying something, what you're saying, it's a life skill. But we can bait that skill at home, and we can do this over the dinner table, and we can even have a day where we say we're all going to try to keep it tight and we're all going to tell a tight story. And I've done this with many, many families this spring and this summer, and it really, really works. And that way it's not singling anyone out. The other thing is listening, right? So it's very easy, even in COVID, for us all to be in our own little silos, but to work on listening skills. I have exercises in Why Will Know and Play With Me where we have kids listen to a story and then pick up the details, or to draw a bug that, you have to listen to the details or you won't be able to draw the bug right. The other thing is reading cues and body language, teaching families that they can turn to a kid and say, what does my face say right now? And one of the things that we can do is to have Zoom even represent people's facial expressions and have kids read them for us, have kids interpret them, have a family chat, have a chat with relatives, use this in school, right? So we're doing these lessons, we're doing remote lessons, have kids read body language, read social cues on the video. It isn't as wonderful as in person and in school, but it is possible. And because in person and school often is now happening in a mask, it might be the option that we have. The other is working on emotional and self-regulation skills. I have complete lessons on this in Why Will Know and Play With Me, but as you all know, self-regulation is really about these levels of arousal in the brain going up. So to share that with parents and families and to help them and empower them, and we're going to talk about this later, with ways to help their children and build those emotional coping mechanisms. And thinking about and helping families think about what are the specific skills the child needs in order to move forward. One of the things that I talk about a lot is we're practicing sometimes in the virtual world, and then we're going to translate this into the in-person world. So here are the steps to learn new social skills. We identify the child's story or mindset. Many of the kids that I work with have a story that they tell themselves, right? Everybody is mean, it just happened out of the blue. And so I go into this extensively in other talks that I give, where we have to sort of help kids understand the rules of the social world, how people react, and become better observers of how people are reacting to them. I would argue we can even do this over Zoom. My famous story is that I walked in on one of my daughters, she's 12 years old, Zooms last spring, and there was a kid, this kid, you love them, but you know them, who asks a million questions, even when the teacher is clearly going to let everybody go. And that kid was raising their hand and they were asking questions, and every face, every little box I could see was getting annoyed. But that particular kid could not see that. And so we still can help them over Zoom recognize the unspoken rules of the social world and what's going on so that they can continue to learn and grow. We have to pave the way so that the child is willing to work with us. And I'm going to talk today about a coaching communication style that really helps with kids who are defended or resistant, and also how helps parents and child and teacher and child have more collaborative conversations so that we can talk about tough stuff, we can talk about the need to work on certain things, and we can have conversations about anything. anything. It can be about too much electronics, or where they do their homework, or finding a solution. And this style really works well in terms of bringing the kid to the table and getting them to talk more. And then we have to, as I said, improve their understanding of the social world. We have to create an image for them to navigate toward, so that they navigate and have observation and practice and experience, and then find ways for them to practice and learn. So we can translate these skills to the real world, because it's totally possible, especially if we're able to have conversations with kids about this. So my feeling is that we have, online communities, and even in those communities, there are social norms. Teenagers are telling me all the time all these rules about Discord, or no rules, or what's going on, or Google Hangout. And we can help young people test the norms. We can help them interpret social cues. And then as they move back into in-person learning or in-person instruction, we can help them see how to translate that. Many kids that have high anxiety, who are introverted, or who feel like this has just been so hard to make friends and relationships, do very well in the online world. I obviously have spent years worrying so much about them being immersed in the online world. So one of the things we do a lot is talk about, we're going to translate this into in-person learning, but I find some of them are having an easier time actually being brave and getting out there and reaching out to people, but not all. There are kids for whom this just doesn't work, and it's really, really hard for them because of the online. Part of what I want to help kids do is take a bird's eye view of their role and pause to notice group dynamics. And a lot of what I talk about and Why Will No One Play With Me is how we can do that. One of the ways I'm going to talk about in a minute is using this coaching communication style. It's actually very reflective, and it holds a mirror up to your behavior. So it's a great thing for parents to do in daily life, because instead of us saying, you were rude or you behaved this way, we're helping the kid to think about it and reflect on their own role. We want to help kids step into other people's shoes and see how their messages are received and see how other people are reacting to them. We know in social emotional learning that one of the big things that affects self-awareness and building that self-awareness muscle is that kids become better noticers, so that they see how people are reacting to them. We can work on this in the online world so that they are building that muscle, because we don't want to lose time. We also can talk about the culture and norms wherever there are, and we can help them to see the need to adapt to those norms. I mentioned small talk and having conversations and reaching out, and then building bonds to deepen those relationships and to nurture those relationships. I would argue that, I would love for us all to be in person, but if we're not, we can do this. And so one of the things I talked about was telling a tight story. So one of the things I'll do with young people, and is in the curriculum for Why Will No One Play With Me, is to help them look at filtering, right? What are you talking about? With whom are you speaking? How much are you sharing? And what are the details you're imparting? And so many times I have examples in the book where kids, see a tight story and read a story and then are asked to filter it themselves. But I think that this can be done in daily life, so that we rehearse with kids and we also help them to tell things in a way that becomes more linear and helps them think about what's the level of intimacy and trust they have with people, and why are they getting at this story. So one of the things we all face as a challenge in our society today is social media. And so one of the things I love about telling a tight story and the levels of intimacy and the sharing and all of those kind of things is that we can talk about social media and the fact of, who are you sharing with? What are you sharing? What level of detail are you sharing? And do they need to know that? And I think it's very empowering for parents to understand how to help with these things. Because the idea I have always had is that we give them either the concepts or the actual lessons. Both are in there. So one of the things we have to do is obviously be able to talk about things with children and to improve communication within families. And I would argue, even if you're in a classroom, if you're a teacher, no matter what you're doing, we have to be able to problem solve and talk about tough stuff. The other thing is a lot of kids are more defended, more guarded, and they don't love it when we sort of go directly at things or we tell them our opinions. And so one of the techniques we use in the coaching world is open questions and reflective listening. And what I find is this is a technique that if you use it, you can use with literally anyone. It works, I always joke, it works with mother-in-laws, it works with your boss, it works with coworkers, and this is what it's about. So the idea here is that instead of directly telling someone something, we actually would ask them a question. Now, obviously, there are kids with lags in terms of verbal skills, developmental lags, where they have a hard time with the open questions. So for kids, for instance, on the autism spectrum, we would use the next technique, the reflecting, but we might not use the open questions. We would narrow the questions more. But for a lot of kids, if we ask them about something, this wonderful thing happens, and we use who, what, and how kind of questions. And you don't have to be a perfect question asker, but as you start to do it more and practice, and I want to say practice throughout your life, just start doing it throughout your life, what you'll find is you get wonderful information and you have a lot more of a collaborative discussion with people. So instead of saying to a kid, go ask that playmate or mix into the group, or, I want you to, stop being on electronics, here's going to be the plan, right? And we give them the plan. What we would do is ask questions, right? What can you ask a playmate? What steps go into joining in? What's going on in terms of, your friendship groups? You can also ask them, what they think about other people. What do they think is going on for that friend? With your teacher, what do you think that they're looking for? And what happens when people do this is this wonderful thing where we basically float above our body and we hear ourselves saying things, and therefore we become more able to witness and think about what we're saying, right? So if a kid says to me that it's impossible, one thing kids have been saying to me lately is, this whole thing is impossible, I'll see you when there's a vaccine, right? So instead of going into the tirade as a parent, we can ask them questions about what they're feeling. What do you think is going to happen when there's a vaccine? What do you think is going to change? And you can have more of a discussion rather than telling them, which they prefer, right? So we're trading in the tell. The other method is really easy to master, and that is reflective listening. And all that is that you repeat back the child's statement without giving your opinion. So you're just recapping their statement. You can use their own words, or you can actually literally just, give them the gist of what they said. And they literally use this method in prisons. And the reason is it sort of diffuses things for a few reasons. One, you're confirming what they're saying. You're clarifying. You're making sure you actually understand what's going on and what that child's position is. And then they feel validated when they hear their own words, right? So they feel like you're hearing them, you're listening to them. And we really do want to know, do we get it, right? So a lot of times when we're working with teenagers especially, they have some idea about social skills, or they have some thoughts, and it's really hard to get them talking. But if we get any information, we can just reflect it back. And then they start to really hear themselves. So I have a little story about this. I had a boy who used to literally hold up his hand to tell people to stop talking. He also did a motion like this to tell people to speed it up. And he was very, very bright, but just didn't have that social emotional knowledge. And his mother was, distraught about this, right? She was worried that he would never have a girlfriend, he would never have a spouse, who was going to tolerate this? And he did often insult teachers. As a matter of fact, I talked to one of his teachers once, and the poor fellow was so distraught over the fact that this young man, he felt didn't respect him, that it was like a therapy session. He was telling me all of the things. And we know in life that people will not react well to that. So when you have a kid like that, sometimes, especially if they're at the age of teenagehood, so they haven't had any intervention, they really think that their way is okay. They don't understand social rules, right? And how do you start? So the reflective listening is a great way to start, because what you do is you just re-encapsulate, right? So what he said to me was, I think it's totally okay to tell people to speed it up and to tell them that they need to use economy of words, was what he said to me. And so I just reflected that. I said, okay, so you're saying it's okay to tell people with your hands to speed things up and to make them use economy of words. And if not, you can walk away. And he got so upset. He said, well, when you put it like that, Caroline, that's terrible. I said, put it like what? I just reflected your words, right? So now he's hearing himself. He's floating above his body, and he's hearing his position articulated, as opposed to I start telling him, you're rude, people don't like that, right? Which is the parent thing to do. We're all guilty of it. So what happens is that the kid starts to look at their social beliefs, right? Or their position on anything, and they start to understand and witness and hold a mirror up to it. And from there, you can have discussions. It also helps when you're trying to bring kids to the table to get help, right? Where we can just reflect to them or use the open questions. And I call this paving, and I talk about this a lot in the book. We're paving the way toward them coming and getting help, right? A lot of times we can't just say to them and they'll come overnight, especially if they're resistant. So what we're doing is we're building that relationship, and we're helping them look at how this would help them. But instead of telling them, we're going to use these methods. This also helps during play, right? Because we want them to learn about the social world, and rather than telling them, we're helping them to reflect on things and to evaluate. So it's a very evaluative method. So even when I coach kids around play or play dates, we're using these kind of things. If a child has limited language, then we can use visuals. But even with small children, I can say to them, who do people like to play with? What do they like about people who share? What does it feel like when people won't share? And we can start that social emotional learning using these methods. So one of the things I talk about a lot is the parent's role, right? And paving is a huge piece of it, gaining that buy-in, getting the child's perspective, helping them look at the stories and look at what they tell themselves, and helping them to shift their mindset over time, and building skills so that children can connect. Because if we can't connect, then we know that things are going to be harder in the workplace. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is planning the play date and pre-planning social interactions. And this could be a teenage hangout or a play date. For kids who struggle socially and who really have a hard time, one of the things I walk them through in this curriculum is how to look at the environment, the temperament, the length of the play date, the time of day. Now, I also talk a lot about skills, right? So you could have the perfect time of day, and if a kid doesn't have the skills, then the play date isn't necessarily going to be a success. But as we're building skills, we need to practice, right? And so it's really important for parents and children to be able to have social hangouts, have play dates, so that they can practice these emerging skills. And I do talk, in case you're wondering, about how to get play dates if you have a hard time getting play dates, because that's the number one question I'm ever asked, and same with teenage hangouts. But we know that planning can't overcome lagging skills, but I also do find that even when kids have emerging social skills, emerging play date skills, there's times when, because of the busy lives we lead, we just kind of, we say, oh, this playmate doesn't have a good temperament for this kid, but we're still going to do the play date. Except when we're trying to practice certain skills, we really have to think about things like temperament so that the child has an opportunity to practice. So this is just part of the curriculum where we're looking at planning the play date and coaching through the play date, coaching before the play dates, virtual play dates. I do want to just touch on this for a second because it comes up so much. I really feel strongly, and the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with some things this spring, where, for some kids, virtual play dates are developmentally not appropriate, their language skills aren't there, and they really struggle over Zoom. And so I feel badly because I think a lot of parents are holding themselves to standards and feeling terrible if virtual play dates fall apart. So I always say to remember the attention span of the child, and I really think that there's ways to build those social skills, as I mentioned, if virtual play dates can't work and you're in a part of the country or the world where in-person, even physical social distance isn't allowed. We can plan scavenger hunts, we can have, we can read to kids, we can play headbands and charades and games that are good to build social skills. We can do crafts, we can do show and tell during a play date, but I do think that there are kids for whom the virtual play date doesn't work, and it's just a tough medium for them, especially younger ones. A lot of what I talk about with families is coaching from the sidelines. I really want parents to understand the need to help kids learn skills and learn them in the absence of us as parents. So, the idea here is that if the child is, not in physical danger, or there's not something where they need to jump in like that, and I go through that in depth, we remind the child, prompt the child, give the child cues, but we don't necessarily come and orchestrate, right? And so what I always describe to families is I'm not a puppeteer, right? I am a guide, a shepherd, right? I'm teaching them skills, and I'm seeing if they are able to make that skill work and practice that skill. I also talk a lot about the need to remember that sometimes we have to really focus on the skill we're working on, and understand that the child may have actually demonstrated that skill. They may have actually shared their toys much better. They might have reached out and joined in if they're a teenager better. But there may be still myriad lagging skills that are there, but what we want to focus on is that prominent skill of the sharing. So if they do that, I want parents to feel good about it and say, okay, that was great. The other stuff, wasn't there. So I do a lot of coaching using the open questions and reflective listening with kids, prompting them to remember the playmates' feelings, and helping them to understand and think about the feelings of others. In the case of COVID, a lot of people are, having interaction mostly with siblings, and siblings sometimes deteriorate into fights, as you know. And so one of the things that we can do is we can ask them to think about the emotions and feelings of the siblings, right? And to look at the playmates' facial expressions, right? What are they feeling right now? And we can use the open questions and reflective listening to prepare for the play date, and then also to think about it, or the teen hangout. If there are safety issues, I obviously tell parents to jump in, but I do a lot of prompting and cueing, and I find that even kids on the spectrum, if you have a symbol to remind them of their intention, right? Because we set a mission for the play date. What's our mission? What have we been working on? And, if we have some cues and prompts, a lot of times it gets them back on track. And if not, now we need to work on self-regulation or emotional regulation or whatever it was that got in the way. So I have a bunch of little prompts in the book, but one of my favorite is to carry in a particular snack. You're carrying the popcorn and the juice boxes, and then the kid remembers, this is my cue that maybe I'm becoming a little too bossy. And what I talk about with families a lot is, we're trying to develop the lagging skills. I find that debriefing and going over the play date and what happened and what went well, or the teen hangout, is essential. And one of the big things about coaching is that we do debrief and we do look at things and we take that bird's eye view of situations. And again, we can use our open questions and reflective listening because we're just going and we're looking at things. What is the situation? What went well? And helping them witness. So rather than telling them, you did everything that you weren't supposed to do, we want them to think about it and reflect on it and build that self-awareness. So I have kids who literally make every choice during the play date for their playmate. They literally are like, this juice box you will eat is very berry and I will have fruit punch, and they're more controlling, right? And so and I have teenagers, right, who dominate, and the parents are telling me, oh my gosh, the kid didn't want to play this anymore. But what I want to do is help that child really understand the norms of the social world and how people are reacting to them, right? We know from all the social emotional education literature that part of self-awareness is seeing how people react to you. And so we can use our open questions and reflective listening. We can ask them, what choices did you make? What choices did your friend make? What did your friend think about, when you told them what kind of juice box? I do a naughty thing when we're in person in my office. I literally take giant blocks, and this is in the book. I have an exercise called Pile of Choices. And I literally take giant blocks, those big foam ones, and I put every choice the playmate made on a block, and I put the choices that my client made, and usually my client, made up to here, and the playmate, made just a measly 2 or 3. And I just stand before the piles of blocks and I ask them, what do you think? And often they tell me it isn't true, it's a lie, their mom is delusional, whatever. But what I do is I don't go into the telling, I don't go into the lecturing. I say, okay, maybe it is. Let's go through. And we go through one by one, right? Did you tell them to drink very berry? Yeah, okay, right? And we look at those choices and we look at that visual of how it feels. You could build that visual on Zoom, literally. The idea here is that we're looking at, what are the expectations of the social world? What are the expectations for the play date? What are the play expectations? What did your friend think when she didn't get to play a game? And also knowing that in many cases, as we debrief and uncover, what we're going to uncover is the need for better self-regulation, right? That their intention was good. Maybe they even understand the social world, maybe not. And that we're going to have to build in self-regulation skills so that they notice in the moment. But either way, the debriefing process is gold. I do this with teenagers too. Social media, kids have all these tweets. The past week has been just absolutely out of control with kids on social media. So what do? I ask them to read them to me, and we look at them. And I'm much more detached. Partly because they're not my kid, but also because then we're really looking at it. We're taking a 360-degree look, and we're asking ourselves, who's reading this? What are we sharing? When we hang out with people, are we being flexible and that kind of thing? So I talked before about this simulation process that I do, where I look at the expectations of the social world, and I look at social models, and I help kids think about and witness their behavior. And we think about how can they, knowing the roots of what they're trying to learn and what's the desired behavior, what are we trying to teach them? How do we simulate that, right? How do we create social learning even if we're not in an in-person situation? I also have been doing this for a long time because I have many kids who can't get play dates. And so when we're building lagging skills, when they're going to a social skills group, when they're doing whatever they're doing, they have a really hard time getting regular play dates to practice these skills or regular hangouts with other people. And so for years, I've been trying to find other ways for people to build these skills because I want them to have this great, pure experience exactly, as research dictates. But research also shows that it's really important to bring these things into the real world. And so that's a lot of what the simulation is about for me. So if we're trying to, for instance, help a child build eye contact and reciprocal conversation, we can have dinner together. We can play games. We can play games that require a lot of listening and eye contact. We can remind them, right, to have their body, squared forward so that they're looking at us. We can make the skill the focus of the day. I always think of Sesame Street, like the letter of the day. We can make that skill the focus of the day. I did this a lot with my own children, even during COVID, because I wanted them to continue to learn and grow. Where, today is all about, we're telling a tight story. Today is all about listening. Today is all about pausing. And what happens is over time, you see kids start to build that skill. Play with siblings. It's not always ideal, and I know some of us have been together for however many hundreds of days, and it's not always working as well anymore. But I definitely think that we can talk to siblings, get siblings on board to help, and also everyone's working on something, so we don't have to isolate a kid. We can really say, everyone's working on something. If you guys play, this is your mission, and this is his mission. One of the things that I think sometimes gets left to the side is showing children what we're expecting them to do and what it looks like, right? So I have this even when I work with college students. Parents will say, well, their child told me they'll do anything it takes to stay at college. And parents have one vision of what everything it takes is, and the kid has a very different vision. And so one of the things I've found is really, really important in education of parents is that we talk about what does it look like, right? So what does good studying look like? What does, cooperation look like? What does not fighting look like, right? That's one of my favorites. I once walked into a friend's house and she had a chalkboard, and obviously out of frustration with her many boys, she had written, no fighting. But what does that look like? right? Because sometimes when I turn to kids and I ask them, they'll tell me that they're doing a bang-up job. They're super. What does flexibility look like, right? Because if we don't show them what it looks like, they have no image to navigate toward. The uncomfortable conversation, and I talk about this in the book, that we have to have too sometimes, is to remind parents to model, right? They have to be social. They have to be out there. One of my stories I always tell is that, you know, if you are that parent who will do anything rather than call the Apple helpline, please right now change your behavior, because the message you're sending to your kid is, we don't get help. We don't get help. We don't ask for help. We don't stop for directions. We don't do any of this. And we want them to get help, right? We want them to realize that, you know, it isn't the end of the world to need some help. And so it's also a very sort of inflexible mindset that you're never going to call the Apple help desk. I don't think I would survive. But what I'm trying to say is, we want to have parents, especially if you're doing this distance learning thing right now and you're trying to help a population of kids, we want to make sure that parents are, you know, demonstrating this. I work with a lot of kids who are level 1 on the autism spectrum, and a lot of them, what I love about them is I can ham it up and they think that I'm just hysterical. But kids really will tolerate us hamming it up. Teenagers, not so much, but really showing them what cooperation looks like. Either way, even with my teenagers, I think we really have to, right? Instead of just saying, take the garbage out, right? For kids with weaker executive function, the management system of the brain, we have to really do this thing where we show them, you know, I expect it to be done by 5. If it's raining, I want it done by 4. This is what it looks like. No stray papers on the floor. Because some kids have that image and some kids don't. So in terms of building cooperative play skills, we can do cooking as a family. We can play games. I have a little video that I'm giving you at the end here called Good Winner, Good Loser. And it's a game, and it's in the book. And you play games as a family or with clients you're working with. And then you help them build self-regulation skills, emotional regulation skills. Because let's face it, we all know adults who aren't good winners and aren't good losers, right? We all know the adult that you say something and they like grab their phone and they test what you're saying and they're like, well, actually, and you know, that's not appealing. So we can play games. And one of the things I also teach families is you do have to sometimes really say, I'm doing this cooking because it has a lot of directions. And if you can learn to follow directions, it's a great life skill, right? Sometimes with kids, especially if they don't have a great social lens or they're not great noticers, we do have to say it. But I personally, as a mom, don't have a problem saying we're working on everybody becoming better winners and better losers. And I will say I think that it was also fun. Putting puzzles together. One of the exercises I have in the book is from business schools. And I've just sort of taken it to another level. What I do is I mix the puzzle pieces up. I guess it's sort of evil. And then kids they have to work cooperatively to put the puzzle together, or even, you know, just, you know, making sure that it's not them doing it independently. At business schools, they have people build things with Tinker Toys and Legos and stuff now, which I think is great. And so one of the things that I do is I have kids build stuff together. My favorite thing to do is to have people build stuff where they're only allowed nonverbal communication and they can exaggerate it, but they're not allowed to actually use words. And so that also is a way to teach, you know, decoding social cues in a fun way. There are iPad-based games in small groups, and I know a lot of speech pathologists use these. So that is another way too. Yes, I absolutely will answer this one. I will absolutely happily share these slides. And I would also say if you are liking this, this is great. All this stuff is in the book and it is written for parents. It is in layman's terms so that they can understand it. And I do agree it is important to build boundaries, and showing is incredibly powerful. And that brings me to flexible me. So flexible me is something I have as a lesson track. And the idea here is that we want to show people what flexible behavior looks like and what are those characteristics. And by the way, an entire lesson that I could do with a kid would be to take these characteristics on this slide and just go over them, you know? Is this flexible? Is this inflexible? What does it look like to be flexible? Have you ever seen anyone be that way? And what I love is when kids can identify examples from their own life. And this is where they out us as parents, right? They tell everything that we've ever done. Yes, the book is called Why Will No One Play With Me? And I will show the slide again at the end. It is, again, written for parents. And Flexible Me is one of the characters in the book. And the idea here is that when we're teaching virtually or in person, we want to work on that flexibility characteristic because we know that many people who struggle socially struggle because they're inflexible. So I talk about inflexible characteristics, right? You know, what are the characteristics of being inflexible? And by the way, I have kids where we argue about this for a year. Right? They are there telling me that it's fine and that they're flexible. We can also teach parents to notice things, right? I love it when you're being so flexible and pointing that out, and tie it to any kind of incentive program or even tie it to privileges, right? You know, I would love to have a conversation with you, teenager. Let's talk about how we're going to work together better. And, you know, by the way, if you demonstrate and show me certain things, I am more willing to give you more privileges, right? Because that's what teenagers want. They want freedom, privileges, that kind of thing. And so when we work with families, I think it's really important to give them these kind of resources so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we're giving them how, you know, all the flexibility characteristics and you know, how to teach kids who are the rule police. One of the things that I think is really a lot of fun is social spy. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but one of the things I've noticed over the years is that people who struggle socially often are not great noticers. Whether it's their attention span, whether it's that they don't know to notice, they're not great noticers. Well, how can you notice social models and learn from those social models if you're not a great noticer? A lot of the kids I work with also don't hear feedback. So we know from social emotional literature and research that one of the things that builds key competencies and self-awareness is, you know, feedback, either in the workplace or from, you know, a loving critic, right? But the thing about it is that many times the best feedback is from other peers. But a lot of the kids with a limited social radar just don't seem to hear that feedback. So parents will tell me, you know, I'm baffled, right? A peer literally said, I'm so tired of your behavior. And it had no impact. And when you ask the kid about it, they will say to me, oh, that didn't happen, or that was just my parents being exaggerating, or that didn't matter. It was no big deal. I have had families during this COVID time where kids are, you know, screaming at each other on video games, and the parents are saying, I don't know if this is, you know, the social norm, and now kids aren't asking him to play video games, so I'm thinking it isn't. And when I ask the kid, they say it's fine. So in all these cases, we really have to turn them into better noticers. So social spy is my way. Now, I want to say first, I do this with little kids, I do this with big kids, I do this with 45-year-olds. The idea here is that with the older ones, I don't show them the cute graphic, but they all love it, by the way. The idea here is that they go into the world or even into Zoom and they notice and become a spy. And I give them a very pointed mission. Now, if a kid is on the autism spectrum, I work with them more, right? So little kids, we rehearse more. You can take them to the library at school or the library in real life, and you can, have them practice noticing without noticing. I even have done it here in my office where I get a box and I pretend it's a locker and I have them, stand at the locker and be fiddling with their stuff and pretend and look and, listen to what people are saying, listen in the lunchroom, and we role play. And I give full lessons of this in Why Will No One Play With Me on how to do it. I also have videos on my website, CarolynMaguireAuthor.com, which I'll show you guys all that information at the end. But of how to do this, but I want to just, assuage you. I do this with all kinds of kids, and I've never had anybody get caught. I've never had anybody have a bad experience. And we role play and we work through all their worries, right? So we look at things. So they have a mission, okay? What are the unspoken rules in different environments? What are your friends talking about? A lot of my shy kids are so overcome with anxiety that when I ask them to role play and build on conversations, they're like, oh my God, I can't even know what people are talking about. Kids who say, I don't have to attend anything at school. Nobody does. Okay, I want you to go into school. I want you to spy. Who's going to homecoming? Who's not? We have systems for them to write things down in code so that no one can know what they're doing. Some of them remember, some of them literally text me on the spot. I always discourage that because I don't want their phone to get confiscated. But the idea is that we're comparing their behavior to others. We're building that noticing muscle, and it also can reduce conflict with parents. So for instance, if the kid says they're doing enough, their effort is great, whatever, I have them spy and see, is that true? Right? When do other people start studying? Are people writing down the homework in a planner? Any of these things, we can reduce conflict by spying. So the idea here is that we want to build that noticing and reading the cues muscle. And I think that this is one of the most important things that we can do. It's the mindset too, right? They have to be open to this, and that's why we spent time on the mindset earlier. But it's also that we have to become better noticers so we can observe the things right in front of us. And you all know adults in your life who, if they notice the signal from their spouse, if they notice the signals from their partner or their boss, they would be better off, right? So we can do scavenger hunts. We can ask kids to observe and notice plants, bugs, spy on people's facial expressions. In pre-COVID, I had a ton of activities that involved going to a mall or a food court and watching people. Those are paloozas of social information. We can show faces in Zoom. We can, watch videos. There's some evidence that children on the autism spectrum can't always learn from videos, but I find that, level 1 autism spectrum kids with formerly known as Asperger's can absolutely watch an episode of the, clip of The Office with me and pick up all the unspoken rules and all the things that the Michael Scott character does wrong. They can play charades, right? And see different things and become better noticers. And what I try to do is I try to bring this into their daily life. If we want to help children listen and communicate better, I have exercises, like I mentioned, where they draw a bug. We can have scavenger hunts where today you're going to have a scavenger hunt and you're going to notice all the people who are cranky, all the people with, this kind of body language, all the people who don't make eye contact or do. And we can show them videos of body language and eye contact. I have one school, and it's a very big school, but they're now that we had some training, they're gonna have teachers get on and do the Zoom with kids and have 4 or 5 teachers who can role play and demonstrate different body language if they don't have videos they can find and stuff, so that we can continue that social learning. And you can have kids shut off the sound on Zoom and figure out the message, right? What's the message from this body language? And that's sort of the playing the charades. One of the other things I love to do is to sort of look at play expectations, right? And we can use SPY for this as well. So we can ask them to spy on, if people don't adapt, does the game continue, right? Who picks the play agenda? Many of the kids I work with, they have a certain game that they like to play. And if that game is not going on, they won't follow the group to another game, and then they end up left out. But they're left out because they didn't adapt to the group. So we can ask them to spy. What did everybody else do? Were they able to continue play? Right? Oh, they were. Okay, well, what does that tell us, right? And so I have these play expectations. I have kids that even over Zoom, I'm working with them. It's not my favorite thing, but it is where we are. And I go through the play expectations and I ask them, what do kids want in a play date? And I use the open questions. And then sometimes we argue and we have a sort of merry little discussion about it. I love the interactive thing of groups, and I love taking this into a social skills group. But if you can't right now, we can still help them grow. I see someone says, as an advocate, teaching and guiding parents, this information would help. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It's really important for parents to be given this support. If you think about it, we need a playbook, right? So I know that I am lucky, as you are, because I am a professional. And so when last spring I was being asked to teach things like, letter sounds, I had people that I could reach out to and say, oh, this isn't working. Like, I'm doing what is being put in Dropbox and it doesn't work. And they can teach me the tricks of the trade. And so this idea is that if we teach parents, then our lives would be better. I would argue, this is just my personal opinion, if you were teaching math or science or anything and you're doing remote learning, it's worth it to teach the parents some things, because at this point, unless they happen to be a mathematician, they can't help the kid. And the idea that they can't help them is very frustrating. So this way, we're actually building that muscle. Parents need to know also, what are the developmental expectations, right? They don't necessarily have a degree in developmental psychology, so how are they supposed to know? So this is, again, going back to spying. So this is my monkey, and he's too far away to reach, but I will tell you, the monkey is stolen from my children. My dog, Winston, who is a poodle, ate the ears off the monkey, and he has been sewn many times. I use the monkey, by the way, with all age groups, unless the teenagers, I think, will reject it. But the idea behind the monkey is he's just fun. And sometimes we talk to him and role play with him. So one of the things that I find with kids who are socially more disconnected or aren't great noticer, it is that they don't notice things like your mask or your t-shirt or what you wear tells you something about people. And in Why Will No One Play With Me, I talk about taking inventories of people and trying to predict their motivations and what they'll do and how they'll react to things. But a really simple thing, especially if a kid is shy or has trouble fitting in or has trouble reaching out to people, is to point out that kids' masks tell you something about them. They tell you about who they are and what they're about. So I did a little funny thing for some little kids that I'm working with, where I gave the monkey like all different masks, and I asked them, you know, what does this tell us about the monkey and his preferences? And these masks I stole from my son who's in kindergarten. And so I took these masks, and it's just an idea, right? They could do a spy lesson where they go into the world, or they go into, you know, their home, and they look at what kind of masks are people choosing? What are they choosing in terms of, you know, the characters, the color, the cut? Are they using disposable masks? And what does that tell us about them? And that's, you know, again, building that noticing muscle. The other thing I do is that my monkey sometimes wears t-shirts. And one of the things I did with a kid is I just had the monkey in a white t-shirt, and I said, you know, what do you know about someone from a white t-shirt? And he said, nothing. Literally, I don't know what you know, I don't even know about them. And I said, right, but if someone has a Spider-Man t-shirt on, or if they are wearing a lot of florals, or they wear a lot of color, what does that tell you? And so one of the things I've noticed is that some kids who are super shy, or they're introverted and they have trouble connecting with other kids, and they're not great noticers, they also don't pick up on these small things. So again, we can spy on someone's interests, right? How do we connect with people? How do we build that bond with them and have a friendship and build relationships with them? We have to notice things about them, and we have to learn to use that information, right? So masks tell us, t-shirts tell us, and that allows us to know things that we can then use to ask in a conversation, right? I see you're wearing Spider-Man. You like Spider-Man, or do you just like Marvel, right? And we can talk about things. The other thing I do with kids is that we do a lot of exercises around, you know, talking about things that don't necessarily interest us, but interest other people, because that's something that they sometimes don't realize. And again, we can use spy for that, you know. Do you know that person? Are they talking about things that maybe always interest them, or do they sometimes talk about things that they're less interested in? What happens if you just let the conversation go, right? Observe conversations. If you don't continue the conversation in a polite way, things fall apart. I call this a polite pretend, where we're just being polite and we're continuing something, and we're, you know, not necessarily loving it, but it's to be polite. Another thing I did with my own family and with lots of kids this spring was that I had them make little popsicle sticks with people's interests on them, and to sort of spy on, you know, grandma's interests and grandpa's interests, and then to have conversations where you're talking about that topic of interest, and asking question and figuring out what someone likes and dislikes, and then being able to predict that, right, based on the information you gather. Again, we can build these social skills even in a situation where, you know, maybe it's not ideal and we're in a virtual environment. Yes, some kids say that spying is creepy. And what I always do is I just either ask them about that, or we adjust. But what it is too is we're not directly looking at the person, we're observing and noticing. This is the free video and all my information. So it's called Good Winner, Good Loser, and it walks you through how to do that lesson. The lesson is in Why Will No One Play With Me? So, you know, you can go directly to the book and use that lesson with your families or your own family. I'm giving you my email address, and my website is CarolynMaguireAuthor.com, so that you could look up. I have videos and all kinds of things on the website and free resources that you can use as you're trying to help your family or other families build these kind of social skills. And I would love to open it up for questions now. If you put your questions in the chat, I will happily answer them. Let me see if there are questions I didn't answer as we went along. The slides, if you want to have the slides for me, I will happily share them with you. My email address is right here. If you email me, I will absolutely happily share the slides with you. Will you put your email in the chat? Absolutely, I will put my email in the chat. Sure, absolutely. Let me make sure that's correct because I don't have my glasses on and I'm not wanting to make a mistake. There we go. So it's in the chat now. And where is your book? Is there a workbook? So the book is called Why Will No One Play With Me? And there is not a workbook. It is sold wherever books are sold. You can get it on Amazon and anywhere. And there is no workbook. The book itself is very much, with exercises, with questionnaires, with all the directions. And it's a hardcover, but it is sort of workbooky with their circle of friends. So how can parents use this information with their circle of friends? So I think by that you mean, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, how do we use this information to build social skills with our circle of friends as the sort of willing participants? And that is a great idea. I do that all the time, where we, ask people to help us, right? Help us model the behavior, help us, we're all together for a social distance backyard thing. Let's all try to, encourage the same thing. Let's use the same language. Let's ask kids the same kind of questions. And the other thing is, if you're asking it because of adult social skills, that will be my next book. But I think that we can use the questions and reflective listening with people we work with, mothers-in-law, other adults, and ask them questions rather than getting upset or getting tense. I'm hoping that's what you meant. If it's not, feel free to say in the chat that's not what I meant. I was trying to ask another question, and I'm more than happy to re-answer that. Support groups, that would be great. So one of the things that I've been working on that I'm happy, reach out to me is I want to, the idea behind Why Will No One Play With Me, I'll show you. So it's thick, right? So it's a thick book and it's this thing. And the idea was that this is the playbook for social. And so I was very fortunate. I had a lot of interest from a lot of different publishers, and heard every publisher's tale of woe for their own kids or their background. And the idea here is that you could literally give this book to parents if you're running a social skills group and have them read it. I have a book club on my website. And I'm about to launch some pre-recorded on-demand programs as well, where people can, walk through every chapter of the book and how I do things, and watch the video and learn from that sort of whenever they want, because live is harder right now, right? But yeah, you could use this book with support groups. You could give this book to families. You can share this book as a teacher when people come and ask you and you don't necessarily have all the answers. You can say, you know what, there's a book to go to. That was the whole idea. You can't wait to review the recording. You can't write fast enough. I know I can't write that fast either. It's sometimes really hard. Oh, thank you. I love that. it would make a great Christmas gift. And honestly, I would love to share this with as many schools and as many foundations and as many vehicles to get this in the hands of parents. That's what I've been doing for the past year. And with the COVID crisis, I really continue to do this because many parents don't qualify for services or don't have support services, and we can use a book. Hold on. Parent support groups. Hold on. I'm sorry. I'm just reading. Scripts. So there are scripts in the book, so that parents literally have a script to have a conversation with the child, especially if they're super nervous about it. They could literally follow the script. And there's also a complete guide of how behavioral change happens. So that's something that I sometimes talk about in presentations. And, what do you look for? What are the signs? Because kids don't sort of say, today I am changed, and parents often don't know. So there's, I go through the stages of change, and then I have what's called How Will You Know? And that's all of the signs of change and the things they might hear, and they're quotes from real kids. So one kid said to me, I know what I should do, but I can't make my body go that way. And so, you would look at the different stages of change, and I would have those quotes so that when parents hear something like that, they can know, well, wait a minute, they may not be producing, the absolute social behavior that I want or the desired behavior, but you know what? They're starting to really recognize when they're having self-regulation issues and when they need to boss their body. And, that is change. That is huge. That is self-awareness. We did a family survey, and one of the top concerns were children getting and keeping friends. Absolutely. And I think right now with COVID, it's like the biggest concern. Oh, thank you so much. Writing the book was sort of an uphill thing. It took me 15 years to get to this point, but I'm really glad I did it. I learned a lot. Now that I understand the publishing process, by the way, nothing will take me 15 years again, but it was, I got my master's degree during that time. So it's not like just I sat around writing a book, but it was really my passion. And yes, there are ways to see when kids and parents are tracking progress, because that's one of the things I noticed when I ran social skills groups, which, I don't do right now because of COVID and because of my schedule. But, when kids are in social skills groups, it's really, a lot of times parents are like, is this working? And what I find, and I'm sure many of you would agree, is that a lot of the signs of change and the things that show that it's working, they're small, right? And they're not necessarily, full change or full progress. So I talk about things like, if they are, adapting is a huge piece of progress, right? And that's kind of what parents are looking for, is for them to adapt their behavior. But part of the adapting process is recognition, or admitting something is an issue, or being willing to even talk about that something is an issue. And so with teenagers, one of the things I struggle with is that sometimes, progress is them being willing to talk about it, or them being willing to acknowledge that maybe it is true that you have to connect and be with other human beings in order to have friends. That's progress. So there's absolutely a way for parents to track progress and to see progress, because that's, I think, one of the biggest things that families need to understand is how that happens. Any other questions? We have a little bit of time, and I want to make sure I answer everyone's questions. I'm trying to look. Oh, thank you for saying I'm creative. That was always how I was. I was a little bit of a, it's a matter of public record now. I wrote, part of the book is I wrote the introduction and wrote my story, and I was definitely a left out kid. So I evolved and changed, and I was always super creative. and a little bit out there. And so that has been sort of my journey. Let me just make sure I'm answering all the questions. Yes, we have to show rather than say, someone is saying. I think that's very true. How do you counter a child's argument that they have friends, but you know they are only online acquaintances? Oh, okay. So there is something in the book called the flavors of friendship. And I've even expanded this since the book was published. And the idea behind the flavors of friendship is that rather than us saying, you know, you think everybody's a friend and they're really an acquaintance, we look at friendship. Who are your friends? What are friends? What are acquaintances? What are people you say hello to? What are buddies? What are besties or close friends? And I now do this with adults in the workplace. And we look at, you know, who do you know and kind of where do they fit? And so we talk about not, you know, directly putting the blaring light on them, but we talk about friendship in general. And part of this is to help them see that, that, you know, they are not necessarily talking about people who are close friends. They are acquaintances, right? And so that's really, really important. The other thing is that I always talk to kids about the fact that they will say that I'm old and we don't understand and everybody just has online friends now. So one of the important things to know is that research does not bear that out. So one of the things that research shows is that kids in the 70s had 5 to 6 friends. Kids in, you know, pre-COVID had 5 to 6 friends. And so the idea that kids just have online acquaintances, kids only have one friend, you know, nobody's really close the way they were growing up, whatever objection they put forward. What I do is I look at friendship in that general way and I share that with them. Then I also use my open questions and reflective listening, right? And over time, we have conversations about, you know, what gets in the way, what makes it hard, what do you like about online? Something that a colleague of mine taught me, Jeff Copper, he's a radio host for a podcast that's big in the ADHD space called Attention Talk Radio. And he taught me a very smart thing, which is we malign video games, we malign the online world, but we never ask kids what they like about it. And so, you know, I happen to think a lot of this stuff is the third horseman of the apocalypse, but if we ask kids about it, you know, what do you like about that video game? What do you like about that online community? What do you like about having online friends versus in person? And we learn more about it, then we can have a more open discussion about these things and help them to look at them and see what works and what doesn't. And to really kind of, this is again using the reflective listening, reflect on what their beliefs are. A lot of times kids, especially if they've been left out a lot, they're very shut down and very defended. And so when you try to talk about going to an in-person event, it's very, very hard for them because you're talking about a big ask. One of the things I talk about in COVID is a lot of teenagers have very thin social networks. So if they're at home and now you're asking them to text a friend, you're asking them to do something that's Herculean because they don't know if that person is going to respond to them, is going to return the overture. It's big for them because they have very limited friend community. And so we ask it as parents and then we get this wall of resistance. The reason we get the wall of resistance is it's a bigger ask than we think. And so that's why I mentioned that with a lot of kids, what I've started doing is allowing them to build relationships in these online communities because that's where we are right now. And then trying to look at how did you do that? Why was that more comfortable? What can you do of that in the real world? And so we're kind of embracing a little bit so that we can get them on our side and so we can have actual conversations. I hope that helps. Okay. Thank you so much for all the compliments. I'm like blushing. One of the colleagues of parents is they have to accept that they can do something to help their kids. Sometimes they would rather put the responsibility on school and providers. I think that's true. I also think, like our teenagers, they are very overwhelmed by this, or they think they have time. I talk about this in Why Will No One Play With Me. A lot of times parents think that they have more time than they do because they do not understand brain development, and they do not understand that it's going to be really hard when someone is a teenager or older to go back and build these skills. It's totally possible, but it is harder. And so one of the things I talk about in the book, and I've written many articles about, is wait and see doesn't work with this. So in many child development areas, if you think about it, riding a bike, many things in child development, as parents, we wait and see, right? Your kid doesn't walk yet, you wait, they walk, right? And kids who have learning disabilities and other disabilities are identified, hopefully. And so parents of those communities learn you have to do direct instruction. This kid does not pick these things up. But I think many, many people don't just pick them up. And so one of the things we need to do is help parents to understand that they do need to use direct instruction, that there are many, many kids who don't just pick this up, and they need direct instruction. Also, remember, 50% of people with social skills challenges have parents with social skills challenges. So a lot of times, they don't have these skills, and so they don't know how to build them. Parents are often concerned that they'll be blamed. Yeah, of course, they're concerned they'll be blamed for the child's behavior. Oh, thank you. I know we often wish we had this when our kids were young, but we can help other people and help them to know about it. Oh, I'm glad this is making sense with your children and their behaviors. I'm so glad. I'm glad that this is helping. So any other questions with the couple minutes we have left? Let me see. We have like 3 minutes left. All right. I am happy to answer emails. It takes me time sometimes because I speak so often, but I definitely will. If you go to my website, there's tons of free resources. And like I said, if you click this link, and here I'll put the link. Oh, no, I won't. I was going to say you can click the link and see if I can go back. No, it doesn't want me. If you email me, if you did not get the link, I will happily email you the link so that you can have it. Let me see if by ending the share, I'm able to do this. Yeah, I am. Here, I'm going to put this link in the chat in case you want to click on it. There, that'll help. And feel free to reach out. I love sharing with different communities and schools and bringing this forth to parents, and we can do a lot of parent education. Thank you so much, everyone.